It's the Smucker's Uncrustables podcast with your host, Uncrustables.
Okay, today's guest is rough around the edges. Please welcome Crust.
Thanks for having me.
Today's topic, he's round with soft pillowy bread.
Hey.
Filled with delicious PB&J.
Are you talking about yourself?
And you can take him anywhere.
Why'd you invite?
And we are out of time.
Are you really cutting me off?
Uncrustables are the best part of the sandwich. Sorry, Crust.
The detective said missing kids usually come home. What happens when they don't?
Based on a true story.
Police looking for John Gacy.
We discovered bodies. By the looks of it, they're younger men.
The things he did to those kids. He's sick.
The system failed these families.
Devil in Disguise, John Wayne Gacy. Streaming now, only on Peacock.
Do you know how many there are?
Up to you to find out.
Hey there, welcome to Why We Roll, a tabletop role-playing game design podcast.
We're your hosts, Chris Pickett, creator of the historical fantasy game Dance Macabre, and Wythe Marshall, creator of the political sci-fi game Stillfleet.
Throughout the show, Chris and Wythe hope to amplify new creative voices. We'll chat with different TTRPG designers, focusing on the world of indie games.
We take a curious approach to game design, working through a range of mechanical and narrative questions that are pertinent to many designers, players, and GMs.
We hope to showcase fresh and even challenging ideas about what makes imagination-based games just so powerful.
Okay, let's find out why we roll.
We're live.
All right.
Hey, how's it going?
Doing well. How are you, Wythe?
I'm great. Thanks, Chris. We're very excited. I'm very excited because today on Why We Roll, we're speaking to the amazing Mark Diaz Truman. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah. I like a lot of your work, and Magpie Games puts out a lot of product. And as you were saying before we got going, I know it's not just you have a team, but your name's on a lot of the books. So thanks again for.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's when we first started. I was the only designer really that was working for the company. My co-founder Marissa Kelly is doing art direction and sort of like branding and stuff like that. And that's changed a lot over the years, right? Like I went through like a 2 or 3 year period where I didn't do any major design work, but I was always editing or supporting. So yeah, my name's probably in every one of these books out here in our display case, but I'm very rarely the main person.
Very nice. Well, why don't we step back a little bit? Actually, could you tell us about yourself, how you got started, all of that stuff, and then also a little bit more about Magpie?
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm Mark. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, so I'm kind of a pretty good distance from a lot of the other sort of design communities, which are probably most commonly found in like Seattle or New York, or there's some in the Midwest. But when I was growing up, I played Dungeons and Dragons when I was in middle school. Played vampire and mage when I was in high school, and then pretty much around the time that like I got into college and went off to Arizona State for college, I didn't really play very many role playing games. And when I moved back home, my brother, who's in like 4 Pathfinder games a week, was we hadn't spoken much, and so I decided to start playing some games with him to have something to do together. And we ended up in some vampire LARPs together and other things.
Nice.
And as a result of like running these big scale games, which often required like a lot of supplementary materials, like the rules in the book are not meant to support 50 players at one time, really, right? So you're always kind of like hacking it to try to make it work. Marissa and I, who had met through one of the LARPs, decided that we were going to try our hand at doing some indie role playing game design. And around that time, I got introduced to the work of John Wick, who I worked with for a while later in my career. But he had developed a game called Houses of the Blooded, which is a kind of really interesting anti-D&D game. Like you play the nobles and the politicos, not the adventurers. And it just kind of blew my mind, right? Like this idea of like stats that were adjectives, not strength and dexterity, but like beauty as a stat, right? It was just like, my mind is blown. And, Marissa and I ended up falling in with a whole bunch of other indie designers who were all kind of getting started ironically, on Kickstarter at the same time. So around 2011 was when we started, which is the same year that Kickstarter opened up kind of everybody to make projects. And so the irony of that for me is that there are a couple of major companies in the TTRPG space that all have start dates within about a year of each other. And that includes us, Modifius, Free League, and Monty Cook Games, which I would say in terms of that middle of the TTRPG sphere is like 80% of that middle in terms of releases. And we all started with Kickstarter projects in that same range. And of course, Monty's stuff, he already had a fan base, he already had an audience, kind of right off the bat. But for us in Free League and Modifius even, it was, doing a project for $10,000 or $15,000 and feeling like you won the lottery because, there was no money in TTRPGs available before that.
Yeah.
So, Magpie kind of grew over the next couple of years in fits and starts. We helped John Wick, who became a friend of mine, do the 7th Sea RPG, the second edition of that in 2016, which raised $1.3 million. And then, had a number of our own projects, including Masks, which is a pretty well-known Powered by the Apocalypse game, Urban Shadows, another pretty well-known Powered by the Apocalypse game, and others that eventually got us to the point where we started doing licensing. And that was kind of the final big sort of growth moment for Magpie was we did a project for Root the RPG, which is based on the very famous Root board game. And that sort of put us in the position where it's like, cool, this is what we do full time as our jobs with multiple people and staff and an office and everything. And that, of course, only got more intense when in 2021 we did a Kickstarter for the Avatar Legends RPG, which raised like $10 million, right?
Yeah, that is massively popular. Right. So, I feel like I can't go anywhere without seeing somebody talking about the Avatar Legends game.
Oh, that's great. That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the problem with being inside the bubble is we're just like I'm just trying to finish an adventure today, man. I'm just trying to get through it, man. It's been a long week, right? It's Monday. Oh my God, it's been a long week. But yeah, like the scale of it is so far beyond what any of us would have ever imagined, right? I mean, it's 85,000 backers, which is just bonkers. And we're dealing with Paramount Global, which is like it's not just Nickelodeon, it's the Paramount Corporation as a whole, their consumer products division, and approvals at a totally different scale. So it's been extremely challenging, and I think people have this impression that, I don't know, we sometimes people will say things like, well, you have 60 employees. I was like, we do not have 60 employees. We have 12 employees. I am one of them. We don't have that many people, right? Or they'll imagine that we have just a giant warehouse filled with books and books and books. Like we have a small warehouse here, and then we store everything else at other places. I can't just walk down the hall and get you 1,000 books. Like that's not a thing, right? So as the scale grows, the problems grow, as Biggie reminds us, right?
Yeah.
There's no way for me to put 10,000 EU packages on a credit card and just like figure it out later. Right, because that's $250,000. So we our goal is never to be a kind of publisher who like we're just publishing stuff that we can get our hands on, right? Yeah. But we're much more of a design studio, right? So the goal is that myself, Marissa, our other co-owner Brendan Conway, who's the creator of Masks, that we really have our hands dirty with every single project we do, whether that be an Avatar supplement that we're doing, or something like Rapscallion, which is a project we're actually bringing to crowdfunding, I think in late February, early March, which is entirely a different creator, Whistler, who's a designer, a writer, an artist. Like she's a triple threat. She's amazing. But like I've been working with her for 5 years to get that game to where I think it's ready to be published in full, right? And so the one big difference I would say between what Magpie does and what a lot of we don't think of those competitors because we're all much more competing with Netflix than we are with each other. Like you play a Free League game, you're likely to play one of ours down the road. So we don't have any competition. Our like sister companies and us all kind of feel like, like we're in this together. The difference between us and them is that we are very focused on the design work that we do in-house. And I think Free League does that too, but a lot of companies, are really focused on publishing, right? And that's because it's hard enough to make money. It's even harder when you decide to do all the design work yourself and try to do it in-house. It's very challenging. And there are days where I have to make decisions like, am I going to do writing and design work today, or are we going to pay some bills because I have to negotiate this contract with whoever? And those are can be very toxic forces working against each other because they're two very different parts of the business, right? And that's been a struggle we've had pretty much since minute one.
Yeah. So, I think that's probably something that a lot of people who are in a similar position, that's a struggle that they've shared. I mean, I know, Wythe, you're kind of going through it as well, and it's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, well, we're a lot smaller, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely the same question of getting started with. We want to do our own indie games and systems. We're writers and artists, and Chris and I work together and stuff, and then you have to form a business, and okay, that means you actually have to take time to do all the business crap, the legal, the contracts, right? Actually, writing contracts takes a while, and reviewing that stuff, making sure you're doing due diligence. And then like that actually wasn't that hard because it's kind of a species of writing, so it's like, okay, another genre of writing, challenge accepted. I found the logistics, man, figuring out shipping to even like a few hundred, like 600, 700 people, much less when you're the scale y'all are at, when you're ordering SKUs 10,000 at a time. You need distributors, and you need to like figure out, okay, how does maybe a printer, let's say maybe in China, like send stuff to the warehouse that then distributes it. How much are you involved? So I mean, that's a world that we're just stepping into. But I hear you on the goal is to like make cool games, which is design sort of means many things. And one thing we want to pick your brain about is aspects of design that you particularly work on, other people at Magpie do, because yeah, I mean, in terms of multi-threats, I mean, I view myself as a writer first and foremost always, but I'm now doing not only the business stuff, but also like a lot of graphic design because my wife has a full-time job still, and I can't make her do it all. So, it's like you have to sort of learn and evolve. So I think it's really interesting to kind of learn how other folks have grown. But yeah, Magpie does so many awesome things. We're probably not going to be able to talk about every game. But I do want to also get back to some of the specifics just because I found it's not just like another powered by game. Like I really like Cartel. So I definitely want to talk about Urban Shadows and Cartel and some of your takes on those mechanics. There's so much to talk about, Mark. We should really...
I know, it's crazy.
Beg you to come back.
There's Masks, there's Cartel, there's Fate, there's... Root. I mean, it's... I think the
publisher... As a publisher, I think it's we did some work in the Fate economy, right? Like doing a mostly monthly magazine called the Fate Codex, and in a lot of ways, the reason that we stopped doing that was not necessarily because we didn't love doing Fate stuff, as much as like there was an intersection of audience and interest around Powered by the Apocalypse and its growth, right? And so like you're constantly responding to what is happening in the market, what things are exciting, and your hope is that you have an intersection between what's exciting to you and what's exciting to other people, and you're just hoping that those two things are never going to be like two congruent circles, but that the overlap is significant.
Yeah, and that's I'd be curious to hear your take and where you're going with Avatar and Root and what you might see as the future, not just as you say for Magpie, but more the industry and especially the indie industry in terms of that, because there's still D20. I mean, I have nothing against Powered by. I like Powered by a lot, but I also wonder how that's evolving, and there is an appetite. I say this somewhat selfishly as someone working on systems that aren't like Powered by, right? But similar sort of indie systems, but something new. And how do you kind of make those decisions about? We need a certain player base, or like how do you even know what are the sort of metrics? So there's a lot of questions. Let me ask: is there something, Mark, you would prefer that we sort of start with, like? One way to start the conversation is what did you...
No, go for wherever you want to start. These are all great questions, and I think you're pointing... It's exciting. When we talked about doing this interview, I think that a lot of times what people want me to come on and talk about is like, they'll be like, come and talk about urban fantasy. I'm like, that's fine, sure, I'll come do that. But you guys are talking about the intersection between design as a process of achieving some artistic point, like saying, I want to do this thing, and it's got to have this goal, and design as... this other kind of design, the product design, the experiential design, which if we pretend doesn't matter, everything's great. You're just like, this is my game. It's awesome. It's wonderful. And then nobody will ever play it, but it's beautiful and it's perfect, right? Yeah. And then we have this other side, the product design, where if that's all you focus on, you end up with these products that are very thin. They don't have anything to them, right? And so you're looking for some intersection between those two things too, and it's not easy. So wherever you all want to start, I think we're going to end up back at the same place of how do you balance these priorities?
Yeah, exactly. You said it perfectly well. It's those two things that are in tension, and you have to find the equilibrium. So where should we start? So you mentioned Powered by and having played obviously these earlier games, which I think Chris and I also grew up with. Can you walk us through that decision to like make your own game and like what that meant to you and your role in it, as again, in terms of writing, mechanics, what you sort of brought to the table and how you got your crew, you assembled your team?
Yeah, I mean, those are so. First of all, I think it's important. One of the things you were talking about, like shipping and stuff like that, is what is expected of a publisher, right, today in the year of our Lord 2024, and what would have been expected of White Wolf in 1994 is so radically different that to call them both publishers is insane, right? Like White Wolf would make a game and print a bunch of books, and then they would drop it off the distributor and be done. Magpie is running an Amazon store and our web store and Kickstarters and backer kit crowdfunding and managing social media, and like we are operating in a way that's like radically different, right? So you all who are entering the industry in the heyday of all these things already happening already have such a different impression. When Marissa and I started, the idea of even being in distribution as an indie person was just, it was not an option.
Yeah.
Why would any distributor carry a game about Shakespearean plays, which was my first game? It's just that's just not realistic. The irony, of course, is that Alliance actually did carry that game for a while because they were trying to scoop up some indie folks. So it was a distributor for a while that was selling it. But you know, when we came to the table, we were just part of what I broadly think of as a 6x9 black and white indie movement that's probably best typified by products like Fate, the Fate core book, Dungeon World, right, is one of the first Powered by the Apocalypse games that had any resonance out of the indie community, and Fiasco, right? Like these books that the whole point of them was you as a creator would not have to go buy full color art. You would not have to, you know, invest in a 5,000 unit print run. You could do print on demand and actually satisfy that market. You print 100 books at a time. That's no problem. And the irony right now, just to illustrate the difference, is print on demand books are awful right now. The costs of paper make it so that a print on demand book is costing like I think we did a quote for a Pillion. I think that when we did a Pillion, the cost per print for a print on demand book was like $2.50. Wow. The last quote we got was like $6 a book.
Whoa.
Right? So huge differences. And we actually, what we decided to do for reprinting a Pillion was, which is Marissa's game about baby dragons. You play baby dragons in this kind of like Spyro meets Lord of the Rings world where the darkness is coming back and you have to fight it and stuff like that. And it's not, you know, we don't sell a ton of copies of this thing, but we make regular sales. It's worth keeping in print. But we actually decided to just tack it on to an Order of Urban Shadows stuff for the Kickstarter because it would cost us like 78 cents a book to do it, and we could print a bunch of them and have them shipped because we're already doing a shipment. What if you're not already doing a shipment? It makes no sense to print those books and try to get them here. So there's this like radically different approach, I think, when you start to think about like owning a business that I just want to be really clear. Marissa and I just did not have at all. Like when we were starting, it was, I love role-playing games and I would like to contribute something to role-playing games. We did like a Game Chef competition, which had Shakespeare as its major theme. And I came up with this idea of having the actors rewrite the play as they played it, right? Nice. And so the dice are about contesting over who has control of the play, the director as played by the GM or the characters, right? And immediately this has so many problems. Like number one, you're asking people to play a person who is playing a character. So like right off the bat, right, you're like, hey, could you play like a person playing someone? Like right out, it's just terrible, right? It's awful. It's too much for most people.
That's a lot of levels of role playing.
Yeah. And then two is that you're actually arguing over narrative control really directly, right? Like like there's no sort of facilitation of moves or any mechanics. It's just like you say what you want, the other person says what they want, and you roll, and then like there's a negotiation there. And it's like, that's awful, right? So the whole thing here is that we ended up falling into this community of people who I think were far more interested in interesting ideas than any sort of actual design. And I think those people still exist, but they are such a small portion of what has now grown into an enormous market, right? And so a lot of the time when I think about my transitions as a designer, when we went to Urban Shadows, I was working on Urban Shadows with Andrew Medeiros. Originally, we were just going to publish it. I was like, I love urban fantasy. This game seems really cool. And then what it took to get it ready for publication was Andrew and I meeting like once a week to revise mechanics and play test them and revise them. And eventually we were just like, well, I'm kind of a co-designer here. I'm not really a publisher anymore because now I'm writing the game with you. Yeah. And when we released it on Kickstarter, the feedback we got was just radically different. It wasn't, oh, that's cool. It was people coming back and being like, this playbook is broken, you should fix it. And I was like, this is the greatest feedback ever because they played it.
Yeah, that's the ideal playtesting scenario, really. It's like you didn't have to set it up, you didn't have to do the work. They just you built it and they came and then they gave you the feedback you needed. That's amazing.
Well, it says something about the maturation of the industry post D20, post White Wolf, where you have a moment, I think, at the OSR or whatever, like 2011, 2013, you know, where people are beginning to like play around more. So it's like Apocalypse World is out, but people are playing around more with like with Urban Shadows. There's all these like faction level mechanics. There's like epi cycles that are really fun, but are not in like in Apocalypse World. It's like, yeah, figure it out. Like use moves, which is just like do whatever you want. And I think it's interesting as you learn, as more people have the same grammar, they could have more interesting discussions. They can articulate better why something did or didn't work, and it provides a baseline. So then you have to beat the baseline. So it's like, can you do better than the game I am playing now? And that becomes a kind of, I think there is a virtuous cycle of it, at least, where like people are genuinely inspired. I think there's probably some downsides to that too, and feeling, you know, some insecurity or competition. But I think it's great that like basically a lot of people at least moved away from D20, and even I grew up playing the White Wolf games and loved them. But you know, in terms of mechanics, it was great to just find like, oh, there's all these things. Even describing the Shakespeare game, it just makes me think of Fiasco and how you had this idea of the narrative constraint, the narrative structure rather being about Shakespeare. Well, those guys had one about the Coen brothers, and then they're finding a way for dice to kind of mediate it, and it kind of works, but it's really on you to be like, yeah, it's a Coen brothers movie. Like we'll figure it out.
Yeah, find that genre. Yeah, I mean, I think the downside of this is what I love everything you're saying. I wish it was that way, but the irony is that I think Urban Shadows has and always will get more feedback from players than every other game we have ever done, including to some degree Avatar. And that's because my theory for this is that Urban Shadows is largely made up of people like yourself and me, who have been, shall we say, disappointed in some of our experiences playing other urban fantasy games. And so you end up at Urban Shadows to some degree because something didn't work for you, and you have big O opinions about how games should work, right?
Sure.
And the you know, so when we got this initial feedback and people are playing it and they're giving us feedback, it's really exciting. We actually found that was mostly not the case with our other games, including Masks. The amount of feedback we get is relatively minor. And I think that's because while in 2011, right, when we do our first game, you might have said that the universe of people buying indie RPGs, maybe I would have known 20% of them, right? It's just 1,000 people, right?
Sure.
Now, the people that are buying Avatar, it's 100,000 people, right? And those new people didn't learn that grammar when they came in. They have no interest in that grammar. That grammar is irrelevant to them. Right. They are just here to play the game. And they take the game as it is, whatever's going on with it, and they play it. And if it doesn't work, well, that's just part of games. Or worse, they say, this didn't work because my GM was bad/good, and they have no sense of it as any sort of game separate from the product itself.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So I've encountered that so much with like Magic players recently telling me that like they don't like RPGs at all because they play D&D once and they had a very combat focused, legalistic, you know, argument struggle session that to me it's like that doesn't even sound like an RPG. Like I remember that
like an RPG.
Like a 12-year-old, you know.
It sounds like playing a tabletop war game to me.
Right.
Yeah. But that's how, if you remember, like that's probably a lot of it started with D&D. It was like, did you kill the Minotaur or not? You know.
And historically, it is too.
And I actually really like Stranger Things for showing. I don't know if you've watched the beginning. Like Stranger Things has this great D&D thing that is actually superimposed with a basketball game, and I think actually like for all whatever feelings I have about D&D, it's fucking fantastic. Like they're having fun. There's stakes. There's tension. The GM is like doing voices and
it's a very idealized D&D session, which is, you know, it's fine. We can have that in our fantasy. We can fantasize about fantasy and have it recur on itself.
But it also gets across. It gets across the best moments I've had. Right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So like there's the potential, right? And so like I think that you're not wrong that there is a bar that has been raised, but I think that bar is inextricably tied up actually in production, not design.
Yeah.
Right? And I think, like, it's funny. I'm finishing Urban Shadows, so I have on my desk, of course, the first edition of Urban Shadows, but I also have the Avatar book, right? And so, like, you could just look at these two books next to each other and be like, this one is a 6x9 black and white book with like 7 pieces of art, and this one is a full color partnership with Nickelodeon, right? And which one is a more completely designed game? Well, I think Avatar is more completely designed because I wrote Urban Shadows in 2014, but like there is something about the production that dominates most people's experiences.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
And so what Powered by the Apocalypse did for us in a lot of ways was just give us a space where people could, this is weird to say, but almost ignore how the mechanics were going to challenge them when they
right.
sat down to play. They're like, oh, I know that. I know what that is. I'll give it a shot. And the game's going to require them to learn. All games, doesn't matter what it is, it's going to require you to learn and navigate that game itself. But the Powered by the Apocalypse created a halfway point. Because like a lot of D&D players struggle because they're like, I know how to play D&D, but I don't know how to play Call of Cthulhu. So in order to learn to play Call of Cthulhu, I would have to play so much Call of Cthulhu that I might as well never do it. I'll just play D&D. And what Powered by the Apocalypse did was give us kind of a middle point where people could say, well, I don't know how to play Masks yet, but I have played Monster Hearts. And those use, quote, the same system.
Yeah.
So I'll try it.
I mean, TSR and then Wizards did that with the D20 system. So there was Call of Cthulhu original, and then there was Call of Cthulhu, the D20 version.
Yeah.
But I mean, partially to your like, I think also this maturation we're talking about, it makes me think of like, because I think you're absolutely right that most people's experience, they do, like, especially younger people or people coming in from other hobbies, they don't really care about any of that stuff. They just are like, is this thing fun? How would I get into it in this moment right now? And then you still have hobbyists, who want to like hack it apart, look under the hood. So that is like two different audiences. One is much smaller than the other, obviously.
Yeah, for sure.
But I also wonder historically, like think about like computing. There's a time when like to play computers, you had to like build an Apple I yourself or whatever, right? Software. And then later, like my phone, I have no idea how this works. It's basically magic. It has games on it. The games are the video games are fun, but I don't write software. So I think that makes sense that as the tabletop world grows enough, you just get enough people who are like, I don't want to know the details. Just make it fun and sell me on it. And to your point, Mark, you do that through those visuals. The fact the book is really nicely designed. I mean, there are different things that appeal to different people, but and there's still a culture for zines and all that. But if you want to mass market, everything you're saying, I'm just putting it in historical context. Like it makes sense that as industries grow, you have to find those ways into like consumer culture in order, for the thing to keep going and going.
Yeah. It's curious too. I mean, I wonder. You talking about production value, and especially with Avatar, I wonder if another reason that you don't get a ton of feedback on bigger titles like that, licensed titles like that, is because people just want the content that it's associated with or that it's tied to, right? It's like people want to be in the Avatar world. They have a window where they can jump through. They know the world. They've watched the show. I mean, like I love the show. It's great. And so, I don't know. I wonder if that's another reason why you don't get as much feedback on games like that, whereas the games that are more specifically geared toward, or not specifically geared, but tend to be geared towards more hobbyists and people that want to hack and tear apart games are going to get those big opinions you were talking about.
Well, I think it's also just proportional, right? I mean, Urban Shadows is a nice mix of, it's big enough that there's a relatively large audience compared to most tabletop RPGs right out there, but that audience tends on average to be gearheads. Cartel, I mean, I'm sure absolutely everybody who played Cartel has opinions about it. That's just only 10 people, so it's easier. Like there's just not as much, proportionally it's not very big. We get a ton of we get a ton of Avatar feedback. It's just that it's not much relative to the 85,000 people that back the project, right? Like it's not 85 times the amount of feedback that came for Urban Shadows. It's 1.5 times, right? And that really points, I think, to the nature of each title. Like each title has its own audience, and I think one of the like heartbreaking parts as a designer that you realize is it's very hard. Like you guys know, like the 1,000 true fans model, right? This idea that you're going to have 1,000 fans, and if you build them up, and they're each willing to spend $100 a year with you as an artist, that would be a very livable wage, because with that $100, you could do all the things you want to do and pay yourself a living wage, right? The problem with that within games is that people don't actually have, I think, much of a loyalty to the brand or the artist themselves. I think they have a lot of interest in the brand that they interact with, and just like going to the movies, unless you are Christopher Nolan, right? The average director remains a mystery for the person who is watching the movie. And so as our industry grows, we encounter more and more realities that I think are fundamentally just based in entertainment. People don't know who you are. They don't know what you've done. They don't really understand what you do. And their interest in it is driven by things that lie entirely outside of the thing itself. But their experience remains the thing itself. So you go in to see Sorry to Bother You, and you don't know anything about Bruce Riley or Lakeith Stanfield or any of the history of Black surrealism. But then you experience the fucking movie, and it's either great for you or it's not, and then you leave, and maybe, if we're lucky, that sparks some sort of like wow, that was intense. Where did that come from? I've never seen a movie like this before. I'm going to go to the internet and read about it. But more likely, it leads to a kind of like, well, that was cool. And then you move on with your life, right?
I think even that one probably is more people do know Boots Riley. You know what I mean? Like Boots Riley does many things and published that as a script in McSweeney's years before it was producible.
Sure.
But I think you're right that so, I think there are people, and maybe we can talk about how this functions in game design, because I think you're right that for the most part, nobody cares what's under the hood, and they don't care about you. So that's like a hard truth you have to learn. They want to play a fun thing, make them a fun thing. But then sometimes you do get people, the Jordan Peele's or Boots Riley's, or as you said, Nolan, even in terms of maybe Charlie Kaufman is the last just pure screenwriter who kind of had that vibe of you'd go see a movie just because his name was on it. You're like, this is going to be fucking weird. But yeah,
but I think my point is that you think that, and I think that. But how many other people really think that?
Touché,
really,
yeah.
If you go to a movie with 10 people, you go see Sorry to Bother You with 10 people, how many of those people can really name Boots Riley and really tell you anything about who Boots Riley is? Now, you are 100% in the category of people who can. So in your mind, one of one, but it's actually one of 10. And I think that's the real problem, right? Is that we're making art in a space where the art itself is both a curse and a blessing, right? People who will try your game or not try your game are doing so for reasons that you have very little control over, right?
Sure,
You can position it or not position it, but then the game will or will not speak for itself. It either does or it does not do the thing. And what we've always prioritized as a company is we have not always done a good job of designing for the first part. Cartel is a great example. Cartel is a terrible product for many, many reasons.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, number one, white people, present company aside, if one of you identifies as such, they don't like playing Mexicans. That's just not a thing that they like doing, right? And
sorry, the cat is on screen.
That's great, cat on screen. Yeah. And I say that with some degree of sort of wink and nod, but it's true that I have never seen people have so much concern about the nature of the characters they were playing as I did when we released the Cartel Kickstarter, right? It became an intense moment of critique of whether it was appropriate to have a game about this at all, right? And some of that critique came from people who had lived through that time period in Mexico and had questions about whether a game could do that work, right? Mm-hmm. But some of them were just white people being like, am I allowed to play a Mexican?
Yeah.
Right? And that's not a thing people ask about Masks or Avatar or Shadows, right? Number two, it's a game in which you play protagonists and not heroes. People generally don't want to play protagonists. They want to play heroes. Now, if those heroes turn out to maybe not be so heroic or they're complicated or they're flawed, they'll accept that. But Cartel doesn't make any such promise. Cartel doesn't even start with you guys are good guys, but it might go wrong. People, especially white people, probably have an understanding that these are villains. And then, of course, the whole lens of Cartel is there are no villains, there are no heroes, there are just people in this terrible situation, right? And so it's for me, I say all the time, it's the best thing I'm ever going to make. It's absolutely my magnum opus in terms of expressing myself and my particular perspective and my desire to make great games in this particular way. But as a product, it struggles in ways that Urban Shadows just doesn't.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It struggles in ways that Bluebeard's Bride, as a game of feminine horror, which you would think would not be especially popular among those same white men, actually does great. White men love Bluebeard's Bride on average. They don't have any problem with it at all because it's a horror game.
Right.
So
and Bluebeard's Bride also borrows a lot from the Dragon game and the OSR movement and all of that as well. So there's I think there's touchstones for people that would otherwise feel uncomfortable, and they can ignore the feminist aspects of Bluebeard's
They could
Bride.
try, right?
They can try.
But they're doing a dungeon crawl, right?
Right.
They're going into a room and having experience their leading.
Exactly.
But this gets into liberalism versus being actually on the left and understanding politics. Because I think a lot of liberals would say I'm a feminist, so I'm totally down for revenge fantasy, being a feminist in a game, even if I'm a man and I'm a cis, gendered man. I'm gonna inhabit this role in order to support, be a good feminist and or learn something about, this lived experience or just, have fun. Yeah. But I feel like what you're getting with Cartel is the messiness of in the real world, the drug wars are not there's villains out there doing evil shit and there's normal good people in Mexico. It's much more complicated, and a lot of that falls on U.S. empire and the idea of a war on drugs or criminalizing certain activities and not supporting certain regimes and not others. We're happy with certain policies, but we don't and and that sort of is something that people I think actually have a much harder time wrapping their heads around, as opposed to like, misogyny is bad, right? And there's some sort of revenge element Kill Bill, right? We can all like be like, yes, we're all Uma, But it's interesting you mentioned, because I really like Cartel, so that's one reason I think I said that in my email to Magpie, but it's interesting you mentioned that, because to go back to the movie metaphor, it's like, I think there's a question of, can you survive? Is it so big that you can have the movie where it's so big that no one knows who worked on it? The stars, but that's what you're saying, the thing they see, the stars, but you don't know the director, the producer, all that.
Yep.
And can you make games where you make some money? Like, I'm curious about Cartel, if you are willing to say, like, did it even make money? Because I like it a lot, but
there's no way Cartel made money.
Oh, okay, so that answers my question. But, can you appeal to the heads, because there are now enough of them, but maybe not. That's just not a thing. Yeah.
The reason is complicated. Right? The reason it doesn't make money or didn't make money is primarily because the nature of Cartel is the irony is it's like high art about a lowbrow thing.
Sure.
Right? Like it's effectively like a mexploitation film. Right, like this exists at the level of Narcos or Breaking Bad. Except, that's why it happened. I'm sitting in my house in Albuquerque watching Breaking Bad. Finished the series, thought that was great. I have some issues with the last season. Neo-Nazis are not a big thing here in New Mexico, because good luck being a neo-Nazi here. But like
they made them Arizonans, I think, for that reason.
When they were Arizonans, I was into it. And then when they moved to New Mexico, I was like, this is very
There's no way. There's no way.
Took me out of it. Right? But anyway, the series finished. I'm like, that was great. I wish, though, that it had not been about white people. I mean, there were white people here in New Mexico, great, cool, whatever. But like, really, this was such a missed opportunity to have Latino characters in a really serious and meaningful way. Mm-hmm. And then my second thought was like, well, wait, I could do that. I'm a publisher. I could do that. And my third thought was, it's not going to make people happy. Right? Like immediately, right? So navigating that, right, having a product where literally every page requires a degree of precision and intensity, right, to create art that works at that level and deals with this extremely sensationalized and difficult topic is like a losing battle when it comes to making a profitable product, right? So if you factor in the time that I took to make this game, it's a huge loss for us as a company. But I think that one of the hardest parts about running a company or being a designer as a professional is you don't get to pick. You don't get to pick whether it makes money, but you also don't get to pick how it changes you, right? So Cartel taught us a lot about fictional positioning, right? Because what Cartel showed us was that there's things in Cartel where you're set up, say the two of you are playing brothers, right? And the degree to which people absorbed that as a real thing for their characters was incredible to us. Right, just like I would have times where I'd be like, I really need to kill this guy, but he's my brother, so I can't do it. I'd be like, are there any mechanical incentives at play here at all? There are none. There are literally none. I could go and shoot that guy in the face today, but we established he's my brother. And we were just dumbfounded because it flew completely in the face, I think, of what the degree of mechanical incentive we thought was necessary for people to really buy in, right? That there would have to be some mechanical thing that's supporting this whole relationship.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you look at what happens in some of our other games, including Avatar, but certainly Urban Shadows and the new version, there's a lot in there that says, hey, there's a balance to be struck, especially within Powered by the Apocalypse games, between what is a fictional position that we're just asking you as the player to uptake, right? Your brothers, right? And what is the mechanical incentive, say stress in Cartel or the stress moves, in which we know we cannot ask you to lose control as a character, because you'll never do it. You'll never really lose control as a player, right? Because that character, you'll always want to hold back a little bit, even if just because you feel guilty about what you're about to do to another PC or something. So that whole game taught us all these things about what is the fictional position, what are the limits, when should people have control or lose control, and that ended up being a huge step forward for us as a company, but not because we chose it, right?
Yeah.
So the difficulty of all of this is, I think that you don't get to choose where your growth comes from, financial or artistic. You just have to try. And so do I regret Cartel as a product? Like, Yeah, a little bit. I think we were a little naive about its potential for reaching people. But at the same time, I don't know another way that I could have done it. And if I hadn't done it, I'd be sitting here on this call telling you about this great game I'm going to make someday that instead now actually exists, right? So, so we did it, right? But
do you feel like as a company, because you have a spread now, you have a portfolio, you're mature, as you say, you're in that nice middle tier where you're able to do indie games and kind of a lot of them. But yeah, you don't have the weight of like Hasbro-ness above you or whatever. That you can do, because I mean, to continue with the movie metaphor, I remember, I think it was George Clooney saying at some point, like, I do every other movie. Like, one movie I know is kind of, it's not like bad, it's just like whatever, it's something for money. And then that allows me to make an intentional choice, which may or may not, like the other movie may succeed, but it's more likely to be like, an award nominee, like serious movie with friends, whatever. And it's like having the ability, because you've reached a certain place, to be intentional sometimes and not worry so much about every product. Or is that not true because you're still ultimately relatively small? Like, you want every product to be Avatar.
It's very challenging. I think that Avatar in some ways was destructive for that plan, because if one of your movies that you make as your money movie is like, I don't know, what does George Clooney make for his money movies? Like Up in the Air, like it's like a romantic comedy, right? Like it's kind of like I'm sure I loved it. I thought it was great. It's a very interesting movie, right?
It's a dark comedy,
It's not really like a small indie film, right? Like it's like it's got a cast, it's got money, it's got it did fine, I'm sure. That's different than if your on movie for the studio is Avengers Endgame, right? Like Avatar is so successful that it just rewrote our company's DNA. Like, we couldn't even keep up with the changes that were going on with it, right? So only like this year, and there's a lot of other stuff. Like, we lost a couple months to a shipping partner. I had some personal stuff. Like, I got COVID twice last year, kind of things, right? Like when you're a small team, you're still kind of at the mercy of life, right? But only now have we been able to, like, for me to say like, oh yeah, like I can actually focus on a new project like all week, right? Because it was so destructive. So I think there's some sense for Magpie that we would like to love to get to the point where we can kind of say like, yep, we're going to do these things and they're going to be kind of at this level, and we're going to do these things and they're kind of at this level. But the really tough part about working in entertainment, and why for like all new designers that I talk to, I really try to drive this home, is like, you don't get to pick. Like, I can tell you tomorrow that like we're going to do another project like Cartel, and then that thing raises $225,000, and it's like warps into this other thing, right? And so the number of projects where we've been able to say, this is the goal, we want to do something like this in this space with this reach. I mean, it's a very small number of projects that have ever done that, right? Because you're just at the mercy of everything else. And so I think that a lot of times what we struggle with is making great things, like, and I think about it as like really the thing itself being great, being what you really want it to be, is so much more expensive than people understand it to be. It takes so much more time than people have any idea it takes. And so, we have sometimes people who are upset with us that this is late, or this thing didn't work out, or this thing didn't work out. It's like, look, I cannot make it go any faster and deliver the thing that you actually want. And we're always trying to get faster, like better organized, better, more thoughtful, whatever, right? But like, I think that the hard truth of doing game design is something like the stress moves for Cartel. Probably like the first draft was pretty close to what you end up with at the end, but the difference between those drafts is like 2 years of work. Right. Even though they're pretty similar, they're not really exactly the same.
It's the amount of time of fine tuning. Fine tuning always takes so much time.
Yeah, exactly. And so you look at some of the artists writers, designers. I look at somebody like Kevin Crawford, right, who's doing so many cool OSR things, and Godbound is like by far my favorite OSR game. Like, we played a long campaign of Godbound. It's a wonderful game with lots of really interesting ideas. But I know that Kevin's attitude about writing is to write, publish, right? He is going, right? And he's able to maintain a pace that works for him and his audience. But he has had to train that audience to value the work he does in the way he does it, right? That it's not going to be a complete game experience. It's a toolkit. You implement it as you want or don't want, right? Like, it's going to be very different than, say, an indie game that Magpie releases, right? And so I think as a designer, one of the things that is really hard for me is to admit that, like, I would love to be like, cool, there's a product phase and there's a a design phase, right? And I'm going to just keep those two things separate. They don't really need to intertwine. Yeah. It's just like you make the thing and you decide how to sell it. And it's like,
it's not how it works.
It's not how it works, right? Like you're stuck with the underlying decisions that you make. Mm-hmm. And I would hope that we get better as a company over the next 5 to 10 years at being like, no, that's a cartel project. It's great. Let's just that's our expectations for it, is to raise this amount of money, sell this amount of stuff, be in this target zone. But it's so hard to be as a designer to know how much is this going to resonate, and you're always wrong. Up and down, you're always wrong.
Yeah. It seems to me it's kind of like being a meteorologist, right? It's like you have your metrics, you have your parameters, you have as much control as you can have. But at the end of the day, it's just kind of it's just the weather. You gotta deal with it.
Well, and we for Avatar, I mean, I think people were like, well, of course, it's like, look, guys, the Lord of the Rings RPG raised $2 million. We were pretty sure we'd do around $2 million on a really great day. That was what we were thinking. And to find out it's much more is like, that's the weather. And you know what? If we had watched 1 week later and the situation had been slightly different, it might have been very different. We don't get to control it, right? And so it's not to say it's all luck, but I think the meteorologist comparison's great. Like you
want to find ranges, and you don't know where within range you fall, but you knew that with the property, right? You'd license something really, really great that we all love. Yeah, and no one had done it, and you know you're a good game designer, so you're like, cool, good game design, good content. It's gonna do $2 million.
It's gonna do great. Yeah.
That's great. It's a good problem. I mean, I'm glad, even though I know it's caused some headaches, but that it did more than that. But absolutely. And I still think Cartel is amazing. I almost said Narcos, but I was just looking back at the book, and that word pops up. But also, it does call to mind that this fiction. It's so funny that you view it that way, just because that the genre of the sort of narcotraficante fiction, even though the sort of largely white American version is usually like good guys versus the narcos, which is not what Cartel is in a good way. But I wonder if over time, I wonder if it'll be one of those gems that like 10 years from now, people are like, dude, have you ever heard of Cartel? Because I remember someone doing that with what's called not Reign of Blood, but the one you mentioned, the John Wick one early on.
House of the Blood.
House of the Blood. I've never actually played it, but that was one that was like a legend. It was like, I knew John Wick's work, but that book I only, it was just like a whispered idea of like this very long, involved, serious, but like it's very like it like mocks itself as the book goes along idea of like, what if it was realistically you were like a noble in ye olde times.
Anyway, there's games like Steal Away Jordan or Dog Eat Dog that I think had a huge impact on Cartel because they themselves are these incredible artifacts, right? And so like I mean, there's when I was very specific in my language, like I don't regret Cartel as a game. Honestly, like was so important to me as a person to say this is the kind of thing I love and I want to bring it to life in this way. Yeah. But like I think that design requires us to ask questions about what does it mean if a game is never played.
Right.
Like, does the game exist if no one ever plays it, or does the game only exist in the playing of it? Right, and that's a really tough thing.
Or in the writing stuff for it by the community. But just because I wanted to like not lose this point of like looking the color scheme is very intentional. The topography, like the sort of geometric patterns that call to mind. It's it immediately sets it apart as a book. Even the format, the square format, and I think that sort of attention to detail. It feels to me as a reader, and maybe because I make my own games and have a similar experience with my own, writing of books, is like you had to do it that way. You couldn't have done it the other way, where you just mash out the keys and it's just Times New Roman, black text on white paper on letter size, and you hit print. It's like no. It had to be intentional, down to like you have a power called Get Fucking Shot, which is a power that you decide. You're like, I'm using the power of me getting shot, which is amazing. Like it's mind blowing. It's just such a great game in so many ways, but it feels like you just had to do it a certain way. And I feel that sort of compulsion as a designer, where I can't, if I know that something's at 90%, I have to make it go to 100 in my mind, for better or for worse. And that means that certain things don't get done essentially, or certain things probably get done slowly. Yeah,
I mean, I have many books around me, but I have the special edition of Cartel here, and one of the reasons is because sometimes when I'm working on something else, I think to myself, I probably said this already in Cartel, and I probably said it better there, so I'm just gonna go look at what I said and see if it works, right? But I mean, every spread of this. So this was, we've tried many things to speed up or change the process. This was from a time where I actually wrote the whole book in layout, right? So
really?
I just wrote it directly in the layout.
Wow, interesting.
Bold.
It's a bad idea. Don't do that.
Yeah, I was going to ask what drove you to do that, but maybe we can.
Yeah, I mean, so part of it is, I mean, the people who are watching can see this, but like this spread has its headers at the tops. It's balanced in a certain way. It works in this particular like complete fashion. All the ideas that are on these 2 pages are the entirety of those ideas, and then the next 2 pages do a completely different thing, right? And like, for example, these sidebars, there's green sidebars in the book that are actually not really about the game. They're about Mexico in a way that actually points toward what the game's about. So this one in particular is about drug addiction in Mexico, which, you know, kind of answers the question, how do drugs show up in your game? What should they look like? And those resulted from Miguel, who's our graphic designer for this and the creator of Nahual and other games himself. He came up with 2 different sidebar styles, and I was like, I love these both, and I put them both to use, right? So they weren't original. There's an interplay between the layout of the book and the writing of the book. Mm. The problem is that when you do that, it means that every sentence you write is deciding what is the art for this page, what are the headers of this page, and what are the structures of this page. And when you do that, 190 times, you're exhausted.
Yeah,
it's not a sustainable way to make books, right? But yes, to your point, it's like, but this page could be a little bit better. Is like kind of the dominating thing, right? And I think that Cartel in particular works because the way that moves work, and if we want to talk about design, this is maybe a good segue into it, is moves aren't, like you said, powers. They're not powers, right? They're moments of fictional uncertainty. And I think what we talk about a lot, why Cartel exists and why it was so important for me to work on, is that Vincent, as the creator of Apocalypse World, Vincent Baker and Midway Baker, who created Apocalypse World, they didn't write a system in the way that Fate is a system, right? Where it's like, or GURPS is a system, right? Or even like the Call of Cthulhu basic role-playing engine is a system or whatever. What they instead did was they kind of opened like a new wing of the house, meaning that the way that Powered by the Apocalypse games work is actually not like the way that other games work, right? They work because they have a moment at which the fiction and the mechanics meet, and only at that point will the fiction and mechanics meet through what's called a move. And that moment no longer has to be about player action. So if you think about something like Fate, right, it's got a big skills list. Mm-hmm. And those skills tell you what you do in the game. If there's a hacking skill that's saying you as the player can hack, right, you can go and hack a computer. But what Power of the Apocalypse does is it says that each of those moments that you're encoding into the game as moves, for example, when you get fucking shot, or verbally shame or abuse someone, or when you melt down somebody's body in a vat of chemicals, those moments are going to be the moments of uncertainty that the game is fundamentally about. And those moments don't have to be because the player chose for that moment to happen. So in Monster Hearts, you can try to turn someone on, right? And that's not because your character necessarily attempted to do that. That's because we all agree that there's some uncertainty about whether you've turned somebody on in the fiction. Mm-hmm. So
but is that actually not a system in the way that, because that's just how I was running D&D when I was 12. You know, it's like the dice are the moment when we don't know, actually. No one at the table knows how to interpret this narrative moment, and we need sort of an impartial, you know, we need physics to tell us, and then we're going to sort of adjudicate and decide. And I know that, again, that's not how that's not the Stranger Things model of killing goblins and minotaurs or whatever, but I feel like if you were coming into the OSR with that mindset, to me, D. Vincent Baker gave that language of how, you know, they articulated how to kind of design games that way. So it didn't feel sort of a totally new idea. It felt like someone had finally said out loud what a lot of people were thinking. But
I think it's maybe it's totally adjacent to that idea, and I think 100%. Like, I've given talks on how that idea, when you reverse engineer it, like you just did, like pull it back into Dungeons and Dragons, it tells us when you should roll dice, right? You should only roll dice when there's some uncertainty. Right. Like, I want to knock down this door. You're like, that door is made of marshmallows. Like, you just charge through it, right? Yeah. Done. Right. But if the door is made of wood and there's some uncertainty to it, then great. And we all see combat as uncertain, because if you're swinging a sword at a goblin, the goblin is like, I'm going to move. I would like not to be cut in half, right? Yeah. But the difference for me for moves, right, and why, you know, people will often talk about Powered by the Apocalypse as being like, well, it has to have playbooks. It's like, sure, but Zombie World doesn't have playbooks. Well, it has to have dice. Sure, but Zombie World doesn't have dice. Well, it has to have, you know, this thing. Well, but Rich Brad, you all play the same person, like in someone's head, right? Like, there's no. But moves are the thing that we do again and again and again, because they tell us, they don't just tell us how to resolve uncertainty, which I think some degree all mechanics are about resolving uncertainty.
Sure. Yeah.
But they tell us specifically what triggers it and specifically what the outcome is.
Yeah.
So in Cartel, if you try to get a read on a situation, right, as let's say you're playing, El Narco, you're the boss, right? And there's a big gunfight, and you turn to the GM and you say, okay, what the fuck do I see? Like, what's going on? The GM says, okay, well, here's what you see. And he tells you, there's no uncertainty. I'm just telling you this is what you see. There's no move for that, right? There's no move that says you get to look around and have some guarantee from the GM that you're going to get some information. You're just told whatever fits the fictional position of the moment. But if you're playing the hit woman, if you're playing La Sicaria and you have the move Mirar, then it says when you look around a tense situation, you roll these dice and you get these answers. And so what it means is that every move is writing into the DNA of the game the actual moments of uncertainty. We don't have to agree on what the moments of uncertainty are going to be in some esoteric sense. The game tells you what the moments of uncertainty are.
Sure.
In Cartel, when you ask somebody how they're doing, and I will say as the GM, like, oh, wait, do you really mean that? You really want to know how he's doing? Are you just being nice?
Right.
You're like, no,
right.
I really want to know. It's like, great, then get the truth.
Right.
Right. And you're not rolling to get the truth in masks. That's not like when you say, what's up, homie, in masks, nobody says, like, is that a move?
Right.
Are you making a move? Like, no, that's fine, right? But in masks, you can peer beneath somebody's mask, right, by merely just being like, I look at him, I observe him from the darkness. What do I see?
Right.
And that's not really a thing in Cartel. Right?
Yeah.
Like there's no like analogous thing that works the same way. And so when I say Powered by the Apocalypse is not a system, what I mean is there are virtually no words that are the same in Apocalypse World and Cartel. They use radically different vocabularies and ideas. So how are they the same system?
Well, the dice for one. I mean, I don't mean to be. It does feel like it feels from the outside. You know what I mean? Like they're continuous and they use the system to do radically different things. I think something you're calling attention to universalize it maybe is that in games, moves or powers or things that can happen that are highlighted by the designer in the text rules, whether it's a system, non-system, whatever, they tend to sort of tell the reader, the player, like what this game is about, like what kinds of things tend to happen. And like again, going back to the Dragon game, a lot of it is so hyper focused to a hilarious extent when you look back, in my old 2E or 1E books, like the fact that they had, very specific rules for the difference between a glaive and a glaive gizarm, like different kinds of 12-foot long axes. It's like, okay, that's a game about combat. It's a game about stabbing goblins with a 12-foot long axe until the goblin's fucking dead. And what does the goblin not want to do is die, so we're going to have to roll and see who wins. Sure. Whereas obviously in Cartel, right, you're not, we're highlighting other things, and you're not highlighting like combat, right? It's not a part of the game. You're not trying to like win by constantly fighting people or anything like that. So I do think there's something about, in any, whether you call it a system or not, like how as a designer you decide to sort of foreground certain elements, and to your point, when do you want to open up a mechanicalized space where everyone at the table doesn't know and we need the dice, or if it's not dice, trading cards or whatever it is, right? Jenga tower. So I think that is a kind of really universal question that is really, really interesting, and I think we all to some degree inherently are grappling with at different times, whether again people are sort of they're focused on Powered by the Apocalypse, or they're thinking, in some other way about it.
Yeah, well, I think that's why to some degree we talk about this issue of system, not to get too lost in it. But I think that when I look at Fate, right, as a system, because everybody agrees Fate's a system, right? It's got, you roll these 46, they have these weird symbols on them, they're not even usual dice. You usually have these tools, and there's a whole bunch of things that can change. But what matters is that there's a real sense of what the cycle of play looks like, right? You as a Fate player are taking big proactive actions within a dramatic situation, and you have these aspects that express your character that say, I'm the last son of Krypton, or I'm a smuggler with a heart of gold, or whatever. And then you have these skills or approaches that mediate and moderate this particular dice roll, so that you are good at some things or bad at other things and stuff, right? And there's a lot of things you can do within that system, but you're not necessarily altering what the core cycle of play looks like, right?
Yeah, no matter what your narrative background for a Fate game looks like, it operates in the same exact way. It has the same order of operations, it has the same mechanics that go throughout it. And I think what you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, is that PBTA games, even though they share similar mechanics, they have different vernacular about how they go about it, and also the order of operations can change from game to game depending on the kind of ludonarrative concerns that you have coming into it.
Nailed it. Great example is like Apocalypse World has harm. So why, to your point, like it means you're going to be taking and giving harm. Like, otherwise, why is this thing in the game, right? Like, exactly, right. And Cartel doesn't have harm. The movie you're talking about, Get Fucking Shot, is actually Jason Morningstar's idea after one of the playtests, in which he said, "Why does this game have harm?" And I'm like, "Well, I have to have some way of adjudicating what happens to people." And he's like, "Well, why don't they just get shot? Like just get fucking shot?" And I was like, "That's brilliant," because in Cartel's fiction, I mean, you've watched a lot of narco fiction. There's no in between dead and not dead.
Right.
Like,
no, you don't have a pool of hit points that slowly gets whittled down. You just are fucking dead.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you're like, oh no, oh man, my arm, oh blam blam blam, right? Like so the point there is to say that like I think that when people are looking at system, they accidentally end up using the word system like 3 ways in the same sentence. They use system to describe the procedures of play and mechanics of play that are happening in my table right now, right? There's clearly a system in play. Then they will say system as sort of an artifact of the design constraints they are taking as given that actually kind of corral what's possible in the space. And then they will say system from the perspective of marketing tool, right? So, so there's a thing here where like White Wolf's storyteller system from like the early 2000s, we'll say like Vampire the Requiem, right? It's a system that's shared with their mage game and their werewolf game because the basic cycle of play, people say they do things, they make pools of dice, they roll those dice and get these successes, remain the same, whether you're raging against these spirits or pulling out magic from nowhere or whatever, right? But what's interesting is that they also share a lot, I'd say, like an system with Fate, with any sort of object-oriented programming, meaning like the goal of describing things in a White Wolf system is, in that system of the like Requiem, for example, you would describe things by these traits. Like, for example, what is their strength, or how many units of damage can they take before they break, or whatever, right? And so when those things run into each other, we have a comparison point. Like we have the two things have to interact as objects in the fiction, right? Now that's easy when it's 2 characters, but actually with White Wolf, you end up with things like, how much can you shoot a door before the door breaks, right? Yeah. Well, that's because the 2 things have an interaction, right?
Right. I think you see that in Shadowrun a lot too.
Shadowrun,
it's like, a door will roll a pool of dice to see.
Yeah,
Doors got dice. Doors got dice.
This actually comes from programming. If you look at object-oriented programming, right, one of the things about that is it has to have this sense of like modular connectivity. For this thing to interact with this thing, they have to have some plug, some port that the 2 of them share, right? So when you have objects in the fiction, they have to have some, or they just go right past each other, right?
Right.
One of the things the OSR and PBTA have in common, despite very different perspectives, is they don't rely necessarily on this sort of like object-oriented comparative programming. In the OSR, it's possible that you just take an action and your character's turned into a frog, and you say, well, I didn't get to roll my anti-frog saving throw, and the GM said, we're not using anti-frog saving throws, you're a fucking frog. Now deal with it. What do you, a frog, do? And you're like, well, I guess I will hop over to my friend and try to get in his pocket so he can go somewhere to get me to be not a fucking frog. But you don't get to say, I'm sorry, GM, but you did not overcome my level 3 resistance to froghood, right, as a result of that, because both of those styles of games, those frameworks, rely on a sense that the fiction should be the primary mode of play. They're like, if you say you do something, then it happens, right? And that's not necessarily true for a White Wolf game, where you end up with these weird spaces where, like, I don't know, people can't drive a car because they don't have enough dots in drive. And you're like, you're 52 years old. Like, how many, like, your character's 52. How do you not have any dots in drive? It's like, well, I didn't want to spend any dots in drive because I need these dots for other things. And you're like,
I mean, they're a New Yorker. They're just a born and bred New Yorker for some reason. They never left.
Or like a 3,000-year-old vampire that can't drive. Like,
well,
that's great. It's a good bit.
Just very lazy.
But like, when we start talking about these frameworks, what I'm trying to get at is I think that we as a design community have fallen kind of disastrously into the branding mode of thinking about systems, which is Forged in the Dark and Powered by the Apocalypse and Rooted in Trophy or whatever, and done a really poor job of asking, what are the frameworks that we can use to describe how games actually work for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I think this is an interesting conversation because I don't know what's at stake for me personally when I say something is in a system, but just it feels like the object-oriented piece. I mean, you could apply that to any of these, right? Is within that system, for lack of a better, whatever you want to call it, right? There are ways for things to hook together and interact. And I think what you're highlighting, which is the difference that makes a difference in this case, is if you think of D20 systems, if you think of the D10 era of the apocalypse, if you think of Fate, well, all of those things, to your point, are like kind of heavily mechanicalized, where you can be arguing with a door or punching a door, and there's dice to represent that. Whereas in PBTA games, Forged in the Dark, in our games, there's not really, like, you would just be like, yeah, you break the door, whatever. But there are actually other hooks. There are other objects that speak to each other. And for example, I mean, even in, again, just to go back to Cartel, because I really like it, but, you have face, grit, hustle, savagery, heat, right? So you have somewhat analogous stats that are generally within the same ranges as other PBTA games. You could even imagine mashing up, which I've never actually done, but this now it is in my head, like, Apocalypse Cartel, or monster, hunting cartel, whatever monster, Nahuatl. You can kind of link these things together and say, well, they do have different names for moves, but in a way, and they have different playbooks and all that. They're using the same dice and the same ranges of changes to those dice, so you could find or create hooks for those things to interact. And I think the thing to get to the difference that makes a difference is you wouldn't do it for fighting a door. You would just be like, yeah, the door's down. You would do it for things like, I'm choosing to die, or I am an assassin who sees the world very differently, so when I am looking to see things, it is different than when the boss just looks around and the GM says, yeah, this is what you see. You're kind of oblivious. You notice, well, I lost 500 guys, or we won the battle, or whatever. And I think that is really interesting. And that, again, is that, like, sort of I was saying, what do you foreground? And I think with newer school design, you have the idea that let's not always foreground the same things that the classic games did, combat and sort of your health going up and down. And I love that idea of, like, yeah, why do we have harm? I mean, it implies you have to keep track of it, so you must lose it at points. So I agree with you on all that. I just think that, like, within the greater world of PBTA, there is some coherence, and it still has a bit of that kind of objects meeting objects. They're just very, to your point, they're narrative objects. They're really narrative first objects, which is great, obviously. I mean, I'm a fan.
Well, I think as a designer, like I'll tell you why Cartel has 2d6 as its main thing, is because then I don't have to teach people how to use a different mechanic.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that one of the things that I was saying about like having system as a marketing tool, right, is that one of the things that really shocked me about Fate was when I was doing development work for it, how much people liked that they always knew what to roll.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you would watch people at their table just be so excited. What do I roll? Same thing as last time. Oh, thank God. And then they would roll, right? And like, I remember really clearly, I got an email from a guy after I did a Fate project, and he said, hey, so I noticed in this new draft you published that strength is like physique in your draft. And I was like, yeah, that's right. Like, we changed the name for strength to physique to better represent kind of like what does it mean to be strong in the setting. And he was like, please stop doing that. I was like, okay, why? And he says, because it's one more fucking thing I have to learn.
Sure.
And I was like actually kind of moved by that. Like, no, you're right. Like, I, as the designer, am going to spend like 18 months with this one set of mechanics, right? Over and over and over and over. And so all the differences in those mechanics are going to be second nature to me by the time we're done.
Right.
Right. But the truth of it is that some portion of being a designer is trying to figure out which affordances are people going to tolerate.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like it's definitely possible to say have no stats at all. In fact, a great example is Pasión de las Pasiones has no stats. You just answer questions.
It's a great game.
And you get a +1 for every question. So that means that if there's something essentialist about stats in Powered by the Apocalypse, that either Pasión de las Pasiones is not a PBTA game, which it definitely is, or PBTA as a brand is different than the frameworks that actually underlie PBTA. Sure. And when I talk about object-oriented programming, what I'm kind of saying is I think you as a designer have to decide when you make a game on some questions that I think most people don't even know exist, right? Like a good example of a different question, different than sort of like, are there objects in your fiction in a mechanical term? When I say objects, I don't mean literally like you're saying narrative objects. I mean, a car exists in the fiction, ta-da, right? Yeah. I think a good question is, can the GM lie to the players? Is that allowed in your game or not? And when I say that, what I mean is the GM allowed to present information that the GM knows to be false as if it were true? And the interesting thing to the answer to this question is, in Cartel and Urban Shadows, the answer is largely no. And in Bluebeard's Bride, the answer is not just yes, but it actually is the case that it is obligatory.
It's encouraged, yeah.
That there's not just encouraged. You must, to play this game, actively mislead your players about what is happening in the game. Right? And this is one of those differences that's like okay, but how do we teach people about that question? Like how do we even get them to see that is a question that they would need to answer? Mm-hmm. And that has everything to do with both the fiction of the game. Like I say, it's largely not the case in Urban Shadows, but it can be in the sense that like you can have these magical experiences or like delusions or visions that themselves are kind of like maybe misleading or designed to be misleading. It's rare, but it can happen. Whereas Cartel, there's no magic, right? So everything I present on screen must be either directly flagged as a dream or something, which you shouldn't be doing that either. But you just cannot lie. You must be 100% totally honest with your players, mm-hmm. right, about what they see and experience within their fictional perspective, right? What's on the other side of that wall? Well, you can't tell. There's a wall, right? That's fine, right? And so I think that like when you asked me a question at the beginning of this thing is really interesting, which is, do people have an appetite for systems or ideas that do not fall into sort of like what we think of as like the 10 big systems, right? Like Fate, D20, right? Like 5e, Powered by the Apocalypse, whatever. And I think that my answer to that question is, number one, oftentimes those systems are much less revolutionary than they think, because they will do a thing like swap 2d6 for 3d6.
Sure.
And then end up with the exact same outcomes, mm-hmm. because they're not actually challenging any of the things I'm talking about. Object-oriented, GM honesty, are GMs fans of the players' characters? Are the characters themselves avatars, or are they deeply invested people, right? This kind of stuff. But also that you're contending with what people are willing to tolerate. Right, so the word tolerate becomes really like upsetting.
Yeah.
like if we had run, I 100% believe that if we had run the Avatar Kickstarter 2 years, 3 years earlier, we would not have received as many backers, because PBTA would have been seen as an obstacle to play.
Yeah.
But because we ran it in 2021 instead of 2017,
it's a feature. Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, I think so, Mark. And I feel like, Chris and I talk about, system and some of these things, the dimensionalization you're talking about, what really matters with, it's not just numbers. It's not just, we'll change a D6 to a D10 or whatever. There's more fundamental questions, but I think it's really useful, the typology you offered. You said three things that if I can name them just to be academic about it, it's like you said, there's like a, how do I do things at my table? That could be called like a protocol, like the way we do stuff. And then you said there's kind of the brand, right? There's the way to aggregate a system as a marker on a book. So mm-hmm. if I look at the book, I know, okay, this says it's using, BX version of OSR, or it's using PBTA or whatever.
Or it's
and
more
then the third
compatible or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's compatible with... So, and then third one's where we spent most of the time, I think, which is actually the interesting part that I think we're in complete agreement about that, which is what you might call in like we'd say in anthropology and sociology, like habitus. Like, how are we meant to think that we could be in this game? So in Cartel, to your point, because it's meant to be, narco fiction, it's not actually, there's no magic. So I don't need to think about wizards or can I use a spell? Like, why would I have that thought?
Right.
So, I mean, that's sort of obvious from like the cover, but I mean, the system at every stage, right, is underlying that, to the point of like getting shot. Like, it's not a game where it's like, okay, if you're getting shot in this world, you get shot, and I think that there are ways, those two levels, so the sort of protocols, like, am I rolling dice now or not, and the habitus, like, what is meant to happen in this world. Sometimes there's really nice consonance and sometimes there's dissonance. And I think the door
really
example is mad funny, because D&D was always like that as a kid. If I played with other kids, it's like they wanted to roll against the door. And I would be like, no, you just open the door.
Yeah.
And I think that was like, they almost were like, yeah, but I have a strength score.
That happens. That happens all the time in the game of Knave that I've been running for a while. Which, it's just light BX, but it's the same thing. It's like, I'll have my players will walk up to a door and they'll just start rolling a D20, and it's like, what do you do? Why are you doing this? Like,
Well, there's an interesting thing to be said there that I think one of these unspoken things, and I love the idea that you're putting forward here, because we talk a lot about groupings, right? So like there's an interesting way in which Bluebeard's Bride is in the PBTA group because it uses moves, it has these kinds of structures, but it actually also has some DNA that's shared with the dungeon crawling group, and then weirdly it also has some DNA that's shared with the investigative horror group. And so I think of these as like these are all overlapping sort of like species kind of things. And you're saying you're like this one actually inherits some things from a couple different things, but like it's still kind of more PBTA than it is those other things, but it's like a PBTA take on that stuff or whatever.
Right.
I like that a lot, because I think that what happens is that people don't really grapple with stuff like can players roll dice without the GM's consent? Like for example, if I in D&D, if I say I want to make a perception check, the GM can't really be like, no, like you sure. And then the best part is, of course, that they can say no, but only after the roll is made, in which they tell you find nothing. Right. Yeah. Like that is right. But like, which
is also a boring moment in terms of like,
it's not good, right? But in PBTA, moves mean that there's a negotiation where you and the GM have to agree. Like, it'll go the other way too. Like you'll say, I hit this guy in the face, and I'll be like, oh, it sounds like you're turning to violence. And you're like, whoa. No, I just wanted to like slap him and scare him. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that's a little intense for me.
Yeah.
How about could you throw something at him? Can I kind of get across this intimidation? You're like, yeah, that makes sense. Let's get there. But the two of us actually have to agree.
But Mark, that's how I run the grit system, which is different dice, but it's like it is the same consensual. It's like, well, what are you trying to do? It doesn't matter. Like, should we be rolling dice? And if you choose to roll perceive, I'm telling you that if you roll a 1, something bad happens. No matter, so there's this kind of gamble.
My point is not that it's PBTA.
No.
It's a feature of systems that people don't take into account, right? And you're doing something really interesting there by saying that if you roll a 1, something bad happens, because what you're doing is you're declaiming authority over that, right?
And setting up a gamble, right? There's multiple things, but my point is just that these are things that you can. It is a la carte at the end of the day, and you can bring them into different systems or whatever you want to call it, different groupings. And so, right, to your point, it's not like PBTA has to be a certain way. It's just that I think there are people who are still very into the OSR in terms of D20, which is not what I'm running mostly, but who play in a style that is more similar to what you're describing. Although I think they would have a hard time getting away from, for example, combat and some sort of hangovers. But yeah, I think we're agreeing on like those are to me the interesting design questions. You know what I mean? More of those sort of I don't even know what to call them. Like you said, who rolls dice? Who is allowed to say no, we're not? Who's making those calls, and how is that authority claimed or abnegated?
And where does the narrative momentum in the system come from? Right. So Burning Wheel has a really unique narrative momentum system. You're supposed
what does
Burning Wheel? You write these beliefs in Burning Wheel, right? And then my job as the GM is to challenge them. So like 100% of the action in this game should be based around your beliefs. So if you write the belief, I must dethrone the king, then I'm supposed to challenge that. I could challenge that by making it hard, or I could challenge it by showing you that he's the greatest king that has ever lived in the kingdom. Right. And
or that his asshole son is going to be worse. So
it's all free, right? Like make it hard, right? Yeah, exactly. And so like those are all really unique narrative momentum origin points, right? The way that you're saying if you roll a 1, there's this risk, and if you roll a 1, it's going to blow up on you, is itself a source of narrative momentum, because we're going to hit that. And you could do that effectively, roll a 1 on a d6, which is going to happen a decent amount of time, or you can do it ineffectively, roll 3 zeros on 3 d10s, and you're like, great, well, this is a source of narrative momentum that's so statistically uncommon.
It's never going to
motivate the game. Doesn't even come up.
Exactly. Yeah. So part of this is, how do we get people, and when I think about what does next level design look like? How do we get people to try different things? I think Magpie always tries to push the boundaries with everything that we do. So with Cartel, that's easy, right? Like nobody's writing Mexican narco fiction games, so cool. That's pushing the boundaries.
Box checked.
Right? Box checked, right? No problem, right? But how are we pushing the boundaries of Avatar? And to some degree, I think the answer to that question is we look at Avatar and say, for some proportion of those 85,000 backers, maybe it's only 200 people at the end of the day, this is their first experience with RPGs. And if their first experience with RPGs is this framework about when you roll dice and what rolling dice means and what characters look like and how they work, that's already starting us in a radically different point than if your first experience is D&D or Call of Cthulhu, right? Yeah. Where you have very different ideas about what a character is and how that character works. And I think that one of the things I see a lot with newer designers, I hesitate to use the word younger because people come into this industry and they're like 50 and just got started, or they're 20 and they've been doing this for 18 years. Like newer designers especially, is I think that especially at the scale that we're at as an industry, which has grown a ton, the marketing and like the meso space between marketing and play is this entire messy space of, will people pick up your game and play it, is partially a function of, do they believe that they have the frameworks necessary to absorb what you're putting in front of them? And the OSR has done this really well, right? Because people who play in the OSR and deal with the OSR have a very broad appetite for mechanics. Right. Like, how is it that Mork Borg and Knave and Godbound are all OSR games, given that they share almost no mechanics, right? And the answer, I think, is that OSR is a framework, in the same way PBTA is a framework. It's a position about how you experience game, right? It's coming to the table and saying, I'm not going to expect the GM to be my friend, but nor do I think the GM is going to be a manipulative asshole. They're going to exist in this relatively neutral referee capacity. And if a game breaks that and like tells the GM not to do that, it's going to be very unpopular, I think, with the rest of the OSR, right? Because it's going to go against one of those understandings. And I think the thing that shocked me is how few of those understandings are workable. Like, there are not an infinite number of frameworks that people will come to games with. There seem to be 10 large groupings, one of which is, I would like to be a hero where nothing bad ever happens to me and I have a largely escapist fantasy. But another is Burning Wheels, I'd like to write incredibly complex characters and have the GM ruin their life, right? That is, those are all, those are also important frameworks. And so I think to some degree I would be curious, not you in particular, right, but like the work that you do you see it as embarking on a new framework or part of an existing framework or expanding an existing framework? Well, that's exactly to your point about what do we mean by system, because I think mechanically it does some interesting things that are new, but I don't think in terms of framework that's not what makes it a good framework. By framework with Stillfleet, like our idea was to make a game about, in a way, labor, like workers, and how corporations under in any kind of capitalist system are just bad, and like you are also complicit in that, and have complicity as a murder hobo be something that becomes undeniable as the game progresses. So at first you're like, oh, it's escapist fantasy, cool, I'm a space marine, awesome, sick. And as you play, you're like, oh shit, oh man, everything I do is like ethically fraught. And then that's actually fun and zany and funny, and it's meant to be kind of a dark joke. So it's ramping up from, oh, I'm playing Mothership, I'm playing Alien, to, oh, I'm in a like Office Space in the future, and I think that framework is, trying to get at like different ways of achieving political, self-awareness through games is what you might be saying is framework, whereas mechanically the dice are doing something else interesting about gambling and when do you spend, your sort of points for using powers, grit, which is unrelated, right? And you can use that. You could use the grit part and the way the scores are different dice, and you could play just a D&D style, goblin murder fest, and just call it a day. So I think to some degree, one of the things you're highlighting is game design. It has these different levels. We don't always have good language to articulate them. If I'm hearing you correctly, just tell me if not. And also that we need to be careful. And I definitely hear you on that. It's like when we say something in a facile sense as a system, what do we really mean? Are we saying I've seen the same sticker on different boxes, or are we saying like this hangs together because the dice speak to each other, or are we saying something deeper about, to your point, this game is about escapism, whereas I would say Fiasco and Cartel are similar in that they're, and even Burning Wheel, right? Those almost you could put in a group, and games like them, where you're kind of, you're going to lose in a certain sense. Well, there's a thing here where, like, one of the things I hate is looking at these articles I see on Facebook or social media. They're like, what the ending to this movie really means. And I'm like, guys, it's art. It doesn't have one. Imagine a world in which you could have multiple readings of the same text.
Crazy concept.
There's different lenses for sure, and I think Fiasco, in some ways Cartel exists because, as much as I love Fiasco, watching people play it is sometimes very painful, because they are goofballs who make the most slapstick silly thing that they can, and they don't actually make any tough choices because there's no tough choices to make within the game. Right. The game doesn't actually have any tough choices. Right? That's where the dice don't match the higher thematic goal in an elegant way, and not to again diss Fiasco. I enjoyed playing it. They need a different goal, which is to tell a story in an efficient way, right? Because
it's meant to be like a party game, as I understand it, from the dice part. Whereas the thematics are very much, I fucks with those thematics,
But there's a thing here where the ultimate thing you're doing, where you start to, because like looking at Stillfleet, it's like you very much fall into something that Red Markets did a while back, which is a game about being zombie killers within a terrible economy, or even something like 316, right, where you're Space Marines and you eventually over time sort of have to grapple with the consequences of your actions, right? It's a game in which the unfolding morality is part of play, and obviously the challenge for that is either you're putting the morality up front and center and asking people to play a game in which they know that they're going to be challenged in ways people generally don't like to be challenged, or which is what Cartel does, right? Or you're giving it to them later, in which case that they don't love that either, right? That's and I think in a lot of ways when I think about my most commercially successful games, because I don't think of Avatar as mine, my most successful commercial game for me is probably Urban Shadows, right? And I think to some degree there's something there that's just people like urban fantasy, so they're willing to give it a shot. But I think there's something deeper, that the core themes of Urban Shadows, this theme of corruption, the theme of tough moral choices within a difficult political system, they're not like the point of the game on the box, right? You're not like, oh yeah, let's make some tough choices about my friends and enemies, right? But when they get there, people love it. They're like, oh no, this was what I wanted from this experience. And somehow as game designers, we're always in search of that alignment.
Exactly. And that's why Stillfleet is the name of the company. That's why it was my launch game, because it's actually, I found that it's not hard. People love the idea of fucking up their company. Like, I work for a company and I hate it. So it feels like escapism. And actually the trick is actually to get them to see that implies a lot of really hard, like, it's kind of like, well, if you do that, then your stable social world maybe goes away or changes a lot, and that maybe is more fraught and is more morally complicated. So it sort of allows you to have your cake and eat it too a little bit. If you push in one direction, you can make it darker and more philosophical. Or you can have a zany game where, in a way, they get the catharsis, the escape of like, subverting, just malingering, right? Malingering is kind of the theme of the game. And, since then we've done other things with it. And obviously the new game we're putting out, Blister Critters, is very different in that you're cartoon animals, but it's still about grappling with, okay, humans have kind of, fucked up the world, and, what's left behind. So now you're cartoon animals, all the humans are dead. Great. And you can have fun escapist fantasy, or you can kind of hone in on stories that are sort of, we say, like, haunted by like the fact that humans were there. But in any case, it's something that we found has been really, it's been fun to listen to how people describe games back to us. And I think as a newer company, to some of the things you said, that's been amazingly instructive, because we're like, oh, that, it helps us understand what's resonating with people, what they find intimidating, what they find not as fun. Mostly we've been, I feel like, pretty lucky, and people have kind of grokked the ideas we're hoping they do. But yeah, I mean, it is 6:30. And I just, as a time check, I don't know if you feel like
we can start to wrap up. More. I just think I just think that the thing the way that you're approaching this, right, I think is really fascinating. Me, why I wanted to talk with you all in the first place is that I think that the evaluation of those goals as successful or not successful within the game itself is really fraught, because you've seen this, like, people give each other very little feedback in public about their games, because I think that we're all sympathetic to the challenges of making games. They're hard, and making them and making any money off them is incredibly hard. And so nobody wants to feel like, well, I played your game and here's why it sucks, right? So like, those things usually only happen in very trusted, very closed environments. But I think that the success or failure of your game to do that thing, present that haunted landscape of humanity's failure, right, is a little bit like the success or failure of Cartel to present the drug war in a way that solidly puts the blame at the feet a little bit of the U.S. empire, of the policies that we've selected in the pursuit of our goals as U.S. citizens, right, and through our ostensibly democratic systems, right? And it's so frustrating, because that kind of doesn't matter at all to whether people buy it and play it and enjoy it. It exists at this total other level of what the game is actually doing versus what people take from it. Right. And I think that is why, honestly, a lot of people in our industry don't want to work that hard at making great games and really struggle to do the work because it's so unrewarding to say, I really want this game to say something and have it be meaningful when you know that that is so disconnected, at least in the initial push with people's experience of it.
And if I'm hearing you right, and again, tell me if I'm literally misunderstanding, because I there's very few people I would respect more than you on any of these topics. So that's in all honesty. But for me, I've had to come to grips with that, and I think I've softened. Like when I started, because when I play games, it's for my, it's with your friends, right, and family and whomever. And then as someone who's like, no, I'm going to like make a product. I was, this is now, let's say 10 years ago, right? If I was like, I'm entertaining the vague idea of it. Yeah. Well, I wanted to have this kind of message, right? Yeah. But as I've done that, and as I've play tested so much and gone to cons and all that, it's like, I don't know if I want to say I've softened or it's not that I've given up. It's just I've realized, and maybe again, if I'm misunderstanding, just tell me, but that's sort of ancillary. That's second order. That's the thing you hope, the connection you hope people make. But the game itself has to have a fun narrative loop on its own. Like it has to be fun because it's entertainment, number one, separate from any possible other philosophical point. And that would be like a nice add-on if that's accomplished, or do you know what I mean? And I think that has become a reality that we are all very like, and again, Blister Critters wouldn't be like, the way I would describe it is it's a game about being cartoon animals. It's just that, yes, there is this kind of assumption built into the world of the game, which actually we share with like even Adventure Time, right, is the same sort of assumption about like the fate of humanity, the ultimate fate of humanity. It's and it's about, again, when do you foreground, when do you background that, but the rules themselves have sort of nothing to do with that. And so I think it's interesting in this conversation when we think about system, when we think about branding a new game, what people will tolerate. I do think of it as almost visualized as levels, and you have to be aware of or what's facing and what's behind or something like that, right? What are people kind of seeing versus the deeper genetics of why you made the game or what sort of sparked your interest in it? So I don't know, as a final thought, I mean, there's so much we haven't talked about, Mark, but is there anything you want to leave off, like advice, not for me, but for anybody, that from your experience and your take?
I mean, I would just say the last thing is like, you use the word fun, and it's so complicated because like by no objective measure is Cartel possibly fun. Like it's incredibly strong. It's like watching Uncut Gems, right? It's like just incredibly stressful. But I always joke that it's the fun that is not fun, right? Like the Germans must have a word for the fun that is not fun. It's an intense, real experience, and I think that like you're right, that I think you start off in game design, and I think this is good general advice to end on. You start off with this sense of like, I want to teach people about X, or I want to get this across, or I want to get that across, and it's kind of like you got a hammer that you're just going to go around and bop people with, and you're like, I've got these ideas, and as you work, you sort of realize like, oh my god, like I have a first order job, as you put it, that like I got to hit first, which is to provide an experience that itself has some value, that itself is doing something. Maybe it's fun, maybe it's just challenging and intense, or maybe it's escapist or whatever. But like that thing is itself like, that's what people actually experience at the movie, when reading the novel, when playing the game. It's
affective with an A, right? It's creating an affect, whether it's fun or, to your point, unbefungehaven, whatever the German word is for the thing when you watch Uncut Gems.
Right. But what we're left with as game designers is to keep the fire alive, is to somehow commit ourselves to not forgetting about the second thing, is like continuing to knit them together whenever possible. And it's very, very, very hard to take the time and find that space. And so I think, for any new game designer, it's a sense of, it gets easier as you, if you keep at it, it gets easier, but that probably your biggest temptation will be to just ignore that second part, because it will never pay your bills. It will never help you sell a game. It will never be the thing that drives the traffic that you need to keep going. And so, keeping that flame alive has to be part of a commitment, I think, to doing the real work. Well, and I'll let you have it there, with the one addition that is something that has been pointed out of other fields. For example, Virginia Woolf's articulation into the lighthouse by a fictional, I forget, it's mathematician or scientist, but the idea that in science you're adding, or philosophy, you may only get, like, he uses this alphabet metaphor from A to Z, and like he only gets to R, and his whole generation only gets to R, but they got one letter further than 25 years ago. The next generation might get to the next letter. And maybe one day we'll get to T, and who knows if U and V even exist. But it's like,
you got to wake up and do it because it's a vocation. It's not a job, or else you'd probably make more money doing something else.
Yeah, of course. But this is, to your point, this is a very exciting time to be in games. I mean, there's a lot going on in games that's very exciting. And there was a long time where there wasn't any messy metal that Magpie and others occupy, right? So this is an extremely exciting time.
And you did make money because, Avatar. So, I mean, and many other things again. So,
well, yeah,
Mark, you're a legend. What can people expect next? What do you want people to search? Do you want them to follow just at Magpie?
I mean, Magpie Official is great on X or whatever it is. Obviously, you can sign up for our website for our email list on our website. And in the coming months, we're going to have some new Avatar stuff that we're going to be announcing this week. I'm going to be finally getting Urban Shadows out the door in the next couple of months, which I'm really excited about. And then we have a new project, like I said, Rapscallion, which is from Whistler. It's a project we've been working on for a long time that I'm really excited to give people another view of what PBTA does in a different and interesting way. But the best thing to do is always, I think, go subscribe to our email list, especially as X/Twitter disintegrates. I think the best place to find us is right from the source. So you can find us at magpiegames.com, and we'd love to have you tune into what we do.
Awesome. Well, for sure. Thank you so much for making time. We're going to check out Rapscallion. I also see you have a space horror game, so we're going to have to have you back on and talk about science horror. My
you're gonna
favorite.
Want Marissa for that, because that's her stuff.
Sure.
Is that, but she will also have many interesting things to say, I'm sure.
I'd love to talk to you. If you're not too annoyed at me now, then we'd love to have her back.
No, that's great. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Mark. I'm gonna end the stream, and thanks to anybody who tuned in. This is Why We Roll. It's something Stillfleet Studio does. We talk to game designers, and we really appreciate Magpie Games and the work of Mark Truman. So have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Why We Roll. Our theme music is by the brilliant Sam Tyndall and Arcline. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You can find us on Twitch and what used to be Twitter at Why We Roll, and on Instagram at whyweroll.pod.
You can find out more about Dance Macabre at timespaceplace.itch.io/dance-macabre.
You can find out more about Stillfleet at stillfleet.com. Thanks for listening.
Every hero strikes out on their adventure for a different reason.
To prove myself worthy of my mother's praise.
To write my own story and discover who I really am.
To prove to my family that I am more than they believe me to be.
To revive the god that has chosen me.
But when the fragile balance of the world is in jeopardy, and sinister forces move in the darkness, heroes will be tested, pushed to their limits and beyond. And it will be left to them to determine if they are up to the task. There is a darkness rising. Will they be able to overcome the challenges and meet this evil head-on?
For my god.
For my story.
For my freedom.
For the world.
To restore the balance. Modified Role Season 2, The Chronicles of Erin, a D&D 5e actual play podcast. New season, new characters, new story. Find us on all the usual podcasting apps or at modifiedrole.com.